Hello, welcome to Tales from the Bridge. My name is Tristan,
I'm James.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Sam.
and we are talking about Blade Runner in our second film club episode. You guys looking forward to this?
In a
Oh,
way.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And we're definitely going to start things off by doing some honorable mentions. So we'll mention some other sci-fi movies that start with the letter B. It's going to be a long time before we get back to B again, because we are going alphabetical with these movie picks.
Yeah, and please, as always, like, subscribe, follow us, send us a review, send us an email. We'd love to hear what you think of the show and if you have suggestions for future episodes.
And also, I want to shout out to CFRU, the local radio station in Guelph, cfru.ca, anywhere in the world to listen. We're on Thursday mornings at 9 a.m. But we love CFRU and just want to say thanks to them. And if you're listening on CFRU, thanks for joining us.
All right, let's make our way over to the bridge.
All right, honorable mentions of other sci-fi movies that start with B. What do you guys got?
I was gonna start with one that I had thought of, and then I immediately sort of redacted in my brain, and that was actually Back to the Future, just because it was sort of like just
Yeah.
such a seminal movie in my childhood. But the more I thought about it, I have decided it's not a sci-fi movie at all. Actually, it's a time travel movie, and that's it. The sci-fi elements are not, I don't think, important enough to the narrative as much as the characters and their development and their places in time are important. So I sort of backpedaled on that a little bit because, yeah, the science element obviously facilitates the narrative, but it's not the focal point of the narrative, unlike something like Blade Runner, where without the science, you don't have the narrative, right? But anyway, that brought me to my other pick, which was Brazil, the Terry Gilliam classic. Was definitely something that would have been a runner-up for me for B films. That was in 85.
Brazil, that's one that I would want to talk about maybe sometime in the future to go deeper. Terry Gilliam, there's no other filmmaker like him. Though he's an American, he really makes a European feeling film. And he's got so many different films. 12 Monkeys is a favorite of mine as well. And they're him. They're Terry Gilliam. And you can tell with that fisheye lens that he uses a lot. And he uses a certain kind of angle that just not many American filmmakers use. And he really does that well. And Brazil is Robert De Niro's in that. I don't know how they got him in that, but
Yeah, he always seemed to me someone that would have been, if that hadn't been his path, maybe graphic novelist or something like that. Just in the way that he frames everything and how he uses the way that we look at it to inform the sort of feel of every scene. And also a stage guy too, right? Obviously. So everything is sort of framed with that live performance edge too. But yeah, fantastic. And yeah, it would definitely be good to sort of dive on that deeper later.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in with my next, and I would have picked Back to the Future as well too. I think I saw that film 5 times the summer it came out in the theater, and um, I don't know. I don't know if I care to split the hairs that much. I'm going to call it a sci-fi film or science fiction film. For me, it qualifies. And even though it really is just a means to an end, there is no story without that scientific fiction. So, and it's just so damn good. But yeah, Back to the Future would be a great pick for me. For a secondary one, since we've already gone there, I'm going to go even further back to another childhood important movie that will probably get some laughs, but The Black Hole from Disney. Man,
yeah, I like that. It's good.
I love that movie. I mean, if you've watched any of it now, if you have your Disney Plus subscription, script wise and pacing wise, it's a little shaky. I still have yet to get through the whole thing, but still design wise and conceptually and visual effects wise, it still brought that magic back. It terrified me in parts as a kid, and equal parts terrified and fascinated. So yeah, Black Hole.
I'm with James on the Back to the Future genre. There, I think it sits squarely in sci-fi. It's time travel. I think is science fiction and by nature, and I think has become a story device that takes you to other worlds, just like a spaceship does, right? Like just as in many other ways. You look at Planet of the Apes. Is Planet of the Apes is definitely sci-fi, right? So and a time travel movie. But But it's good to disagree. If we all agreed, it wouldn't be that exciting show. Now, my pick for B, it might be a little controversial because it could be a pick for A. I'm going to go with The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. Maybe, I mean, I always just do it as Buckaroo Banzai, but technically it is Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai. You know, this is, I just love reading the the description. It kind of yells at you, right? Like Buckaroo Banzai is caught with his trusted allies, the Hong Kong Cavaliers, in a battle to the death between evil red aliens and good black aliens from Planet 10. Right? Like it's just like got all the 50s sort of throwback and kind of cool. And it had a $17 million budget in 1984. Like something went horribly wrong there. But yeah, totally fun, poorly rated movie, and I recommend people see it. But yeah, I would have tried to squeeze that into the letter B if you guys would have let me.
Yeah, I will let it slide.
You know, I
I'll
hate to admit, Sam, I have never seen that movie. I have gotten to this point in my life and have avoided it, not intentionally. I've just never gotten to it. But do you think I should make it a priority? Do you think should I sit and watch that?
You 100% should. I just recommend that you have an edible before doing it, and it's just like, yeah, it's totally. I was like, I don't know. Oh, it came out in 1984, so I was 10. So if you have an evening where your inner 10-year-old is banging at the door, this is definitely a fun cheesy watch.
we got to get out of the 80s though. It's funny how when we read books, we read a lot of contemporary stuff. And when we talk about movies, we're like, even the 90s is a little too contemporary for us.
But I think it's those like formative years, right? The stuff that really like hit you early, right? And kind of sticks with you. But
And maybe we're kind of being dads too, where, you know, if there's a younger listener out there, we're like, come on, son, you got to watch.
yeah, for
You
sure.
haven't
I'm
watched
actually
Buckaroo
surprised.
Banzai yet?
I'm surprised you didn't bring up batteries not included. I kind of thought that was going to be your pull, actually.
I mean, there's a bunch we could keep going.
No,
That
no,
one,
no.
I,
I
I
know.
love that one too, but
Yeah, we are stuck in the
yeah.
80s. It's true.
There are worse places to be stuck. I say that now, but yeah, God.
All right, then. Film Club. Well, this was my pick. And I'm going to be honest, I kind of felt like I had to pick it. At the same time, our first movie was Alien by Ridley Scott. And now we're doing Blade Runner by a film directed by Ridley Scott. I'm not going to start off by saying too much. I kind of just want to pass it over to you guys. I'll definitely chime in and have a few things to say. For our listeners out there, if you're Blade Runner fans, it's quite possible you know way more about these films than I do myself or we do. You can go on YouTube and find days and days worth of documentaries, retrospective videos, all kinds of stuff on Blade Runner. So I think in a way too, we just want to kind of get everyone a little bit excited to revisit Blade Runner. If you haven't rewatched it in a while, go back and revisit it. Go watch some YouTube videos to learn more about the behind the scenes because the story of how it came together is fascinating. I do really appreciate this film. Is it one of my favorite films? I don't think it is anymore. And it's possible that I just watched it too many times and now I'm a little bit like, and that's a me problem. That's not a problem with the film by any means at all. But I am underwhelmed by it a little bit. I do, but here's the thing: I very much appreciate it. Like this is the first time we saw this cyberpunk world on screen, and it still looks better than most of the stuff that we get today. It's the first time you just get all these night scenes on film and rain, and that there's a lot of other culture influences in the film, which you just usually don't get with an American or British film. I'll chime in as you guys have things to put in. I do appreciate, but I just want to say I appreciate this film. Am I blown away by it as much as I used to be? No, and I'm willing to be blown away again if it's possible. But I think I'm a bit tired of it, and maybe it's because I'm also a root for the underdog kind of guy, and this film is just not the underdog anymore, and maybe it used to be. So again, that's me being a bit of a dick about this, but I want to hear how excited you guys are about it, and maybe that'll help me out. So, what do you guys think?
Well, I'm surprised in your sort of negative overview there to use the word underwhelmed, Tristan.
As am I, James.
That
As
is,
am I.
yeah, right. That is not the word I offended or whatever, but underwhelmed. Yeah, I would not apply that word to this film at all. But I maybe Tristan is a rogue replicant. Maybe he's going off grid and he's needs to be retired. But I this was this film was it was a bit of a late burn for me. I didn't jump on the bandwagon right away with as with most people. It was a later discovery for me. And I actually remember in the early 90s, dating myself, being in at film school and discovering it and writing an essay about it. And I wish I still had the essay because that would be, I'm sure it was written with plenty of time in advance. And I did all sorts of A+ research, no doubt. But I do remember the one thing after watching it and putting this essay together, I started to get the deeper symbolism. Again, early 20s, and I was waking up to the fact that movies could be about more than just violence and fun, and in amongst all the rest of the thematic elements about what is life, and what does it mean to be alive. I noticed that there were so many questions asked throughout this movie, but none of them were ever answered. Lots of questions were asked and answered with more questions, which I thought was a really kind of interesting parallel to life. Like some people find the answers to the questions that they're looking for, or at least think they do in real life. But yeah, I feel like I need to go back and watch my copy again to see if that observation holds up. But I thought that that was a really kind of cool script approach to this huge thing that did kind of blow my mind when I got to it. And that's a above and beyond all the obvious, the cinematography and the acting. Harrison Ford was fresh off of Star Wars, or still in the middle of Star Wars and Indiana Jones, which were huge influences for me. So that was an instant draw. Again, as you mentioned, Ridley Scott, fresh off of Alien, huge draw. So it's funny, Tristan, I think in some ways the film has had a opposite effect on me that it's had on you. It's kind of grown on me more. I think it has become more a part of my sort of taste. But yet, I can see what you mean in the sense that it is dark. Like it's a dark place to dwell in, I appreciate it and love it for the art that it is, but philosophically, it's especially with the rise of AI and the much publicized rise of AI in our real world, it's a dark place to dwell. Um, so yeah, that's my opening salvo, and I will leave it to the rest of you guys to give your opening thoughts, and we'll go from there.
Well, it is dark. I think I agree that there's no disputing. I definitely agree with you on that. I look at Blade Runner as a kind of sci-fi film noir. You've got a sort of shabby gumshoe detective in Harrison Ford in the tradition of Robert Mitchum, and he occupies the moody anti-hero Deckard perfectly. And as does Sean Young in her role as the femme fatale replicant Rachel, and the world building is also aligned with all of this, that sort of dark Kowloon inspired setting. For me, it's completely believable. And my issue with the film, and this is an issue that many will disagree with, was the pacing. It's slow, and that can be a great device, I think, for building tension or creating mood. But for me, I just feel like I could probably take a bathroom break without hitting pause. and and I get that will be sacrilege for some, as the pacing of Blade
Retired.
Runner. Yeah, that's right. But the pace, I get, like, the pacing of Blade Runner is intentional and aligns with the tradition of classic film noir. And as much as I enjoy classic cinema, and Mitchum is one of the greats, I've always struggled to get into that genre for that reason. My other issue with it is, like a lot of sci-fi films in the 70s and 80s. This film came out in 1982, I believe, and takes place in 2019. So I think we need to have a chat with filmmakers about what is possible within their lifetimes. Ultimately, I think I will say that Blade Runner for me holds up not just as a classic, but as a brilliant film with a world that feels possible just in a far-flung future, not 5 or 6 years ago. Uh, Even more so now with the rise of AI. But I think the big reason it holds up is the same reason it didn't perform well when it was released. At the time, with some exceptions, many sci-fi films weren't all that sophisticated and tended towards a clean sort of Star Wars aesthetic with a lot of like whiz bang technology. And I think Blade Runner showed that a truly compelling sci-fi film can't just focus on the cool technological wonders that the future might bring. Spaceships and lasers and even replicants don't tell a good story on their own. In order to be truly engaging, and I think Ripley Scott understood this, science fiction has to tell a human story. This was something that I think audiences were slow to recognize, and why I think it took so long for Blade Runner to become properly understood and recognized as this awesome film. However cool replicants or flying cars might be, they were correctly cast as a backdrop to Deckard and Rachel's journey. So for me, like it's a great story. I just wish it was a little faster, but I get where they're going for. I think that film accomplishes everything it set out to do. That's why I can't really fault it for the things that I just don't like about a certain genre to begin with. So I mean, I don't know if we're doing thumbs up on this on these episodes, but I have two. Anyways, that's my take.
I love your mention, Sam, of the idea of it being a story that takes place on the ground, right? Even though all these amazing things are happening above them on other planets, right? It's, you're constantly hearing about the off-world colonies and all the other fantastical things that are happening. But the idea that this is a human story on the ground, ironically, human story. But the thing that always struck me about it was, so I came to this movie like, I don't know, maybe my mid-teens, and it was introduced to me by my cousin, who was always a hardcore sci-fi person. And it was probably one of the first times I saw what I would define as a gritty adult sci-fi movie, and definitely the first thing I'd ever seen that was like sort of cyberpunk and kind of messy, and had that film noir tinge to it, largely due to logistical issues with the sets looking terrible in full light, and things like that. But it did lend a really nice tone to it, and the way the lighting was done and all of that, very moody, right? And the smoking and the slow fans, and that whole noir thing. But the thing that always struck me, and I hadn't watched it, I don't know, maybe in 10 years, and watching it again this week, just how utterly sad this movie truly is, from its overarching narrative to where everyone sort of falls in line, right? Because like the framework of it is the idea that we've created these beings essentially, and then we enslaved them, of course, and they got to a point where they could free themselves, and we're like, no. And then we chase them. And not only do we chase them, we theoretically, if you take the director's take on it, we then employ those very things to catch themselves and eliminate themselves. There's so many undercurrents, right, of class system and what it is to be human and what it is to be owned by someone or something, that just I'm always hoping that it'll end a little different. And then he picks up that unicorn, and I'm like, God damn it. Then again, that also depends on your interpretation of the ending or whatever, or which version I guess you watch, which we can talk about later. But yeah, in the end, I do love it, because it is a beautiful example of that genre at that time, and so many other films were informed by it going forward too, which is amazing, right? And it was a huge time at that time. Like you said, it came off the tail of Empire, right? And then went right into Terminator, and we got Robo. There all became this whole sort of like Android time for like a decade, where it was all about, synthetic life, or what does that mean, and sort of springboarded the whole genre. The only negative I actually have, and again, I might never be invited back, is I just don't think Harrison Ford is a very good actor.
Retired.
Yeah, yeah, no, I know.
Wow, man.
I actually find him extremely boring as a performer. Um, Rutger Hauer's got my vote. Even Daryl Hannah's got my vote. Like, there's so many strong performances. Rachel, can't remember her last name. Really
Not
strong. Even Tyrell, for that like 2 minutes we get him, is like pretty strong. But yeah, I don't know. Bit of a lead weight for me. Definitely fits the part, carries it fine. He fits you know, the icon of the character we need to carry it. It's fine, and it makes sense at the time. I mean, you couldn't have found a hotter, sci-fi male lead if you had tried at that time, especially. But yeah, again, sorry to everyone, but that's me.
Um, just to point out here, the book "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep" by Philip K. Dick. I love his books, though they do have problems throughout that I just, I guess, look beyond at this point. But something that's really interesting about the book is, I don't know if you guys knew this if you've read the book, but and for the listeners out there who weren't aware, in the book, Deckard, he just wants to have a real, I forget what it is. I think it's a real sheep.
goat, wasn't it? Or sheep? Yeah, you're right.
It
Yeah,
might be. Maybe
yeah,
it's not though. Maybe we're thinking that because
something like
it's
that.
electric sheep, but it's a certain type of animal.
Maybe it was a
And
goat then. That was my first instinct because
it was,
I did read it, but like decades ago, literally.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
yeah, and he was
And
married too.
he was married. He had a wife, and she just played the typical wife who drank and smoked and didn't really do anything
The
and
typical
supported
wife.
that from those books back then.
Sorry,
These
honey.
are, I would say that's a typical Philip K. Dick wife. He was
Uh,
very one dimensional with the way he wrote females. It's unfortunate, but that's a product of the time. But yeah, he was married, and I think he had a robotic mouse, and he wanted to upgrade, right? And having a real animal was a social status, and having a robotic one, or put you up higher in the social scheme. So people with no animals, real or fake, they were at the lowest. So he was always striving to go for a real animal, and I think at the end he gets an animal. I think, I forget now. It has been long for me too, but
yeah,
that is a really interesting thing that I am so glad they left out of the movie, because it would have been like, what the hell is going on here if all of a sudden we had that. But
They do make a
there's
reference to it with Zora though, and her snake,
right.
right? Because he's
yeah,
like, "Is that a real snake?" And she's like, "You think I have enough money for a real snake?" You know what I mean? They
Yeah.
drop that little
Yeah.
bit, so you're like, "Oh, okay." The little
And
and
hint.
the
and even
owl in
Tyrell
yeah,
and the owl,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
yeah. That was
That's
a
right.
great bit. That was, just to stay on the book for a minute. That again, there's always the controversy of book versus movie. And at that young age, after I had seen the movie first and then read the book, and I was blown away by how different it was. I didn't really realize that you could take such liberty with a piece of art and still sort of, have it related, even title wise. I just learned recently that the title came from a William S. Burroughs project that came from someone else's project as well too, Blade Runner, because there's no mention of that
No.
in Electric Sheep. So
Yeah, but
yeah, and the
also
whole mood
how.
organ thing. So
Oh yeah, yeah.
remember the mood organ too? Like like so different. It's just a completely different animal, fake or real. And but yet I think we're the better for it. I think it exists on its own, and Blade Runner occupies its own space as well too.
I was more surprised at how positive Dick was about the film in general. Apparently, he only saw 20 minutes of it before he passed. They only had about 50 minutes worth of reel to show him, but he was well documented as like he'd drop in. He loved Ford as Deckard. Like he, surprisingly, from what I would have thought about the man, the limited I knew about his public life, he was actually like a pretty big cheerleader for it, to the point where I think they even allowed them to release Electric Sheep under the name of Blade Runner with the poster as the cover of the book briefly,
Yeah.
through Random House, I think it was. But yeah, so that was also surprising. But yeah,
One thing I do want to point out is with the production with this film. I don't know if you guys knew this, but there was so much pressure from the studio to change the film, or at least try to get them to try new things. And after the producers had seen the final cut, the original final cut, I should say, what Ridley Scott wanted as the theatrical version, the studio said, "This is too confusing. There's nothing that tells us what's going on. We have to get some voiceover." And so they brought Harrison Ford in to do voiceover. And this makes a lot of sense. Apparently, when Harrison came in to do the voice over the few days or the afternoon, or what, I forget, they did it pretty quickly, from what I understand. He, on purpose, was very lackluster with his performance and sounded like he just wanted to get out of the studio. And he did that intentionally because he just thought, well, they're not going to use it anyway. This is a waste of time. Ridley already told me they don't want it, but they ended up using that for the theatrical release.
And that was how I was introduced to the movie, and I think a lot of us were too. And frankly, at the time, I didn't see anything wrong with it. At the time, I thought it fit with the whole noir take. But of course, in retrospect, it doesn't need it either. The film, the final cut or whatever version you prefer, stands on its own perfectly well without it as well.
Something I do want to point out too is simply the year this film came out, 1982. And for those of you out there who know, this was probably, I mean, just let's just list off some films: Poltergeist, Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, Conan the Barbarian, The Dark Crystal, Tron, The Thing. These are all great films that came out, and they were all actually overshadowed by E.T. E.T. became the highest grossing film of all time. At that time, it had beat Empire Strikes Back and Indiana Jones. I do love E.T. That's a childhood film. However, do I appreciate? Okay, I'll say I appreciate E.T. more. I think because of what it does for me, it makes me feel really nice. It's a very comforting, nostalgic film. When it comes to filmmaking itself, Blade Runner is far more important. The Thing is far more important. Tron, I don't know how they made that. I don't think I ever finished Tron. I've tried multiple times. I can't finish that goddamn movie.
No one has. It's okay.
But The Thing and Blade Runner are two films I can put on at any time, and I appreciate what they did for film far more than what E.T. did for film. E.T. was a family movie and a really interesting film, and I think it's very important. But when it comes to film and moving film forward, I've got to say Blade Runner and The Thing that came out just a few months before, and they bombed at the theater in comparison to E.T., which is unfortunate and understandable, I think.
See, I think this is one of those times where we maybe need opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily represent those of all the hosts, because I don't know, it's pretty fantastic, I think. And I think as far as filmmaking goes, I think it had its impact in other ways, not necessarily visual effects wise or set design wise, but it's about the storytelling and the ensemble and the emotional impact, I think.
Yeah, ET's. Yeah, I thought that was fantastic as well. I'm with you again here, James. Yeah,
but I like, again, that year, God, 1982.
Good year.
What was in the water? Probably something radioactive, but it was knowing that time.
Yeah.
And wasn't 84, I think, a big sci-fi year as well, too, if I'm not mistaken. But
yeah,
there were some good ones.
84, 85. Yeah. Oh man, it was
but for Blade Runner to come out then too, no wonder it sort of got maybe neglected or pushed to the bottom, because and Ryan, you said I used the word dark originally, but I think your use of the word sad is exactly right. Because you look at, especially with years of perspective now, at the time, if you guys are like me, and I think you probably are, you look at it and you see those cityscapes and you're like, cool. Now we look at those cityscapes and I see environmental collapse, and social decay and corporate slavery, really. So it is sad. It's a really sad, not very hopeful look at what our future could be. But and that commodification of what it means to be human. Speaking of dystopia, if I can just, because this is something that was brought to my attention a few years back too, and I want to get your guys' opinion on it. It was when the sequel was coming out, and I had a friend, a female friend, who I told I was going to see the sequel. And I was really excited because the first movie was so important to me and so foundational. And she's a genre fan too, very smart. And she just said, "Yeah, that first one, it's a bit rapey." And she didn't say it as flippant as that, but her that was the intent. And it came down to that scene with uh Deckard and Rachel in his apartment where he coerces her into kissing him. And I think it goes, that sort of intention goes further. There's Pris, who's a pleasure model, and Zora, who's working in a strip club. All the female roles in this film are quite sexualized. They're combined with pretty gratuitous violence as well too. But then I also read something recently too that and I don't know whether this is a cop out or if it's legit, but the point was, yeah, it's a look at the future, but it's also a reflection of today, and women have it pretty rough in many places today, and that's what they face. So yeah, if it's rapey, that might be that reflection. So I
I
struggle with
also
that.
think I'm glad you brought that up. I do think that just shows up all the time. That's one reason why Sam takes issues with a lot of older science fiction, and we all kind of recognize as a problem. But I do just want to skip back to last time when we did the film club and we talked about Alien. And Ryan, you had mentioned that Alien was the first time that we saw a female that passed the, I forget
Oh,
what
the
the test
Bechtel
was,
test.
the Bechtel test. Can you just kind of recap that? And does Blade Runner pass that test?
It does not actually. It fails it pretty fully. So the Bechtel test essentially just has a require. It's I won't go into the whole history of where it came from, but essentially it requires two female characters. Certain versions of the test require those female characters to both have names and that they speak to each other about something that is not a man. So that's all it takes to pass it, and it's horrific the amount of movies that don't. But Alien does, and this one does not, unfortunately.
Before we wrap, I think we would be remiss if we didn't give a shout out to Rutger Hauer for his
Oh
climactic
yeah,
monologue. Like we can't
absolutely.
we can't leave this episode without talking about that. His Tears in Rain monologue, and again, it's one of those cinematic moments, man, that you can. It gives it's that still gives me the chills after seeing it so many times, and the understated direction of Ford just being there doing his thing, and watching and listening. And we won't comment on acting, but after previous comments. But yeah, I not to give it away for maybe listeners who haven't seen the film, but the climax of this film is something else. So strap in and give it a watch and a listen, because it's pretty amazing.
And he ad-libbed that. It was apparently very wordy. Like the actual scene was paragraphs long, and he
Mm.
just was like, "This doesn't feel like this moment." And yeah, he brought that tears line out of nowhere, and it became. It's actually, I think it's the title of his autobiography too, something possibly. But yeah, no, easily one of the strongest performances, and especially that climax. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful work. Yeah.
And again, paired with the soundtrack at its peak in that point as well too. That beautiful
Mhm.
piece, the
Is it Van Gillies or Van Gillies?
Vangelis.
Vangelis? I'm Vangelis that you know how to pronounce that because I don't. Anytime I hear it, I can't remember.
Nice one,
Um,
Dad.
Yeah, it's one of those pure cinematic moments that I think, regardless of genre, is one of those reasons we love the movies.
okay, I'm gonna
Agreed.
be a dick one more time. I do not like that soundtrack. I'm sorry. It's too 80s.
Is the synth you can't take it?
I love synth. I play shitty synth by myself and record it, and I'm the only one that hears it. Um, but if there was a symphony orchestra like every other film that was coming out at the time, if there was a John Williams, a James Horner, or a Jerry Goldsmith, or someone, I feel like the movie could have been improved.
I think we may have to agree to disagree on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm happy about that. It's a very unique soundtrack. You kind of can't really compare it to any other. So I get that it is the Blade Runner soundtrack. I accept it. I just wonder what could have happened with a Jerry, James, or John.
Okay.
Okay.
Sam, what are we watching next? I'm glad you asked. Okay. So coming up, we are going to we're going to watch another 80s film on Film Club, and we hope this brings back good memories. This film brings back certainly good memories for me. 1985, Ron Howard, and the film is Cocoon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn.
Nice.
Very excited to revisit that. It's been a long time, but I
Same.
do have fond memories, and I'm so excited to find out if those memories are real.
Yeah, me too. Me too, right? Like, I'm very much in that same thing. I was like, is this still good? Like, I really
Yeah.
want it to be still good.
Same.
This was another one that I think I watched a couple dozen times back at that time, and it sort of pulls the same heartstrings that ET does, and it's got that kind of Ron Howard magic to it. So I don't know.
Although my latest Cocoon memory is seeing memes on the internet about Wilford Brimley being 49 when he did that movie or something to that effect.
Oh yeah.
And he looks more like 65 or 70.
Yeah. That's right.
It's like, oh dear God.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, he was of a generation that smoked from the age of 5.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, they went through a lot, and smoking had a lot to do with it for sure. Yeah.
All right. I think Ryan's got something for us to cap off the episode here. What do you got, Ryan?
I just had a couple things. One of the actually things that I meant to mention earlier is the tie-in to Alien, and how they've actually gone to the extent of like they are in the same universe apparently, even to the point where like Dallas, right, Tom Skerritt's character, in his bio, he actually used to work for the Trail Corporation before signing on with the Wayland Corp. And the idea that, this Earth is the Earth that he thinks the crew comes from, and all those colony planets are, where they go to investigate. It's all in the same world, which I thought was kind of cool since we did just do Alien, but that was kind of neat. And then you actually already answered one of my trivia questions, so I'll just do the other. Which is the ending title sequence of the theatrical release uses unused footage from what 1980s thriller?
I can
Say
answer,
what?
but I know it's the happy ending. The original happy ending was unused aerial footage from The Shining.
It was nice. Well done.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, all the road shots that didn't get used in The Shining were used for the theatrical. Yeah, the happy ending. Yeah.
Crazy.
Happy ending for it. But, yeah.
That's cool.
Thank you for joining us today on Tales from the Bridge. We very, very much appreciate you. Lots to talk about in the future. More books, more movies, more interviews with awesome guests. Until next time.